Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Analytic Mind Podcast. I'm joined by Greg Deckler today, which is awesome to get him on. He's done some great work with Enterprise DNA recently, and I'm looking forward to chatting a little bit more about that and the thought process that has gone into some of that work. But Greg, welcome in. I think it'd be good to just maybe throw to you to just give everyone a bit of a background of what you do and what you're doing now. You're probably the busiest man in the Power BI universe in terms of the amount of stuff that you do. So yeah, I'd be keen just to fill the audience in on the vast variety of things that you're up to around Power BI and the Microsoft suite.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just a bit of background on myself. I'm currently vice president at Fusion Alliance. I run what's called the cloud practice. It's really the Microsoft practice. It covers Azure and Office 365 and Dynamics 365. And I've been in technology consulting since I graduated college back in '94. So probably dates myself in terms of my age and that. And mostly always worked with Microsoft technologies through the years. And so these days, even though it's not really part of my job, Power BI is kind of like my hobby and has been kind of for the past 5-6 years now. I've just kind of started out, answering questions in the forums, and then, Pact found me through the forums and wanted me to write books on Power BI. So now I got my 5th title that's going to be coming out with those guys, Mastering Power BI 2nd edition, written in conjunction with Brett Powell. Been a Microsoft MVP again for Power BI for the last 5-6 years now. I've been, most recently I've decided to start writing external tools. So
yeah,
got all that going on.
That's great. And what's when Power BI, because obviously you're in the Microsoft universe predating like when Power BI was re-released. What was your sense when you saw Power BI re-emerge for sort of 5 or 6 years ago in its current form? What was your feeling within your business and just in terms of like where you thought things would go?
I was on board with Power BI. I really saw a lot of potential with that tool set right from the start, and especially when they kind of relaunched it outside of SharePoint. I think that's really when it came into its own. I think that's what you're referring to, when it kind of started out as the power tools within Excel, and then you had that kind of SharePoint interface for publishing, reports and stuff too. And the Power BI Publisher, I think it was called back then, the original desktop. But man, when they overhauled that and got their own service in the desktop, it was like, you could really tell that this was going to be something special. And it was really going to compete with Tableau on a big way. So yeah.
Did you know something was in the works, being really tied into that Microsoft community?
I was just getting started back at that point, so I don't even know if I was an MVP yet, quite.
Right.
So yeah. So I didn't have much insights, but I don't know. It was just something that I've always worked with. I've always had a kind of an interest in data and worked with data and in data analytics and all of that. And just all the things that I could see Power BI solving, because we all at some point have had to. If you're as old as I am, you take some data, you paste it into Excel, you do a bunch of manual transformations on it, create some charts, and the ability for. That's the immediate thing that I latched onto in Power BI. I was like, oh, I only have to do this once, and then it's all automated.
Yeah. But I was, to be honest, I was the same. I felt the same way. It was just, you could just tell that it was something. It was, you could tell that Power BI with its own desktop and the online service, it was going to be something big at that point. It was just a superior tool to what had been there before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'd suffered through all the the SSRS and Crystal report and all of that stuff over the years. So there was definitely that market and Tableau was an early entry into that in terms of kind of that self-service BI analytics type space. But you could just tell it was just ripe for an overhaul, and the way Microsoft attacked that problem with it. And really the biggest thing that surprised me about Power BI, I went back in those days, because it was revolutionary, I think, for Microsoft, was just that whole agile methodology and releasing a new product every month, right? I mean, because we were all used to, okay, every 3 years we go out and Microsoft releases a whole new tool set and we go read about it, learn about it, and learn all the ins and outs. And this was, this was radically different.
And do you think that was just because that was what the competitors were doing, and they felt like they needed to do that? They sensed that the market expectations had changed.
I mean, either that or somebody really smart at Microsoft, like Arun or somebody like that, got into a position of power to implement his will. And that's what he wanted to do. I don't know what the backstory on it, behind all of that is, but I really think the Power BI team was the first team. I think it revolutionized a lot of things at Microsoft, and now you see more and more teams at Microsoft acting like the Power BI team back in those days. Rapid release of features and products and all of that. So. It's amazing. Yeah. But it takes a lot as a consultant to keep up with it all. When you have just the breadth and scope of everything that's going on in Azure and Microsoft 365, and and everything is changing every month. It's a lot to keep up on.
Yeah, definitely. So let's move on to. I'm keen to learn a little bit more about your journey through the external toolbar, and because the external toolbar didn't even exist up until, I would say, maybe like a couple of years ago in Power BI. It was really highly thought of when they released it. Everyone thought, "Wow, this is going to be huge." Being able to bring your own ideas and offerings to the Power BI development space, very much like an Excel add-in has done. So I'm interested in terms of your journey, like when you first identified that there was an opportunity here, and then how you actually came to thinking, oh wow, I could actually build something on here myself.
Well, that's probably a little bit unique. In fact, when the external toolbar came out, I really wasn't super excited about it. I mean, it was like, okay, it's kind of cool, and I kind of researched a little bit and like, oh, that's neat. I never even thought about like building one of my own external tools for Power BI at that time. And I thought it was neat. I could, okay, now I don't have to launch DAX editor and then figure out like, what my port is for my analysis services, that, go through all that rigmarole we used to have to do, and now I can just launch it and it connects automatically. That's great. And I had maybe 2 or 3 external tools installed: Tabular 2, DAX Studio, and I think ALM Toolkit, right? The 3 big ones that I would say back at that time. But really never ever considered writing an external tool. It'd been literally a decade or more since I had actually done any like real, what I would call hardcore Windows development, right? I mean, back in the day when I first started with when I got out of college, I kind of split my time between doing development and infrastructure. But it'd been at least 15 years since I'd done anything, actual real development, what I consider real development, outside of scripting languages and things like that. So it was, but then I had this idea for a blog article that was total joke. And that's what actually led me down the path to writing my first one, because I realized in order to write the blog article and make it funny, then I actually had to write a tool, to go along with it. It was part of the joke, right? Which was all around like, oh, Microsoft's never published any of my quick measures, from the quick measure gallery into the quick measure tool, and this and that, and complaining about it essentially, and just being very juvenile. Which if you read the blog article, Microsoft hates Greg's quick measures, it's designed completely to be a complete joke and be funny in that. So I hope it comes off that way. I don't know how it couldn't, talking about like, turtle carnage and everything else, right? So, but I had to like, oh man, I actually have to learn how to write one of these things. So I took Kay Uncroft's metadata translator tool basically, and like really studied his source code and kind of based some of the really early versions of Mushgookum, at that time, the free tool. I based it around that. But yeah, hats off to Kay for that tool and making it open source, even though I'm not going to get into the whole open source versus proprietary software debate. But I learned a lot from studying his code, and that's really how I created that first tool. So, and then I'm showing the tool to Reed Havens, And he's like, what I would really like would be if something could like set all my sort by columns for me. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And so then I took, basically took a weekend and wrote that and like, hey, Reed, here you go. And then that led to metadata mechanic, which is, hey, if I can manipulate the sort by column, which is just metadata about columns, and I can do that for all the metadata, right? And then, then the two most recent tools was just trying to identify pain points. And one of the pain points is, hey, there's all these external tools that people have developed, and there's more and more and more of them, and you're going to run out of space on your toolbar at some point. And you can't really group them or sort them, order them, the way you want to. So that's where Conductor came from, right? An external tool to manage your external tools. And it's got grouping, you can rename them. It remembers all that information. If you reinstall the tool or anything like that, it remembers your sort order and all of that sort of thing. So, just filling a gap, it's kind of identifying that. And then the last one, DAX Editor, the people have been complaining about the DAX Editor in Power BI Desktop for, since it was released pretty much. And so that was like, there's an opportunity to build something just simple, streamlined, that it's not nearly as sophisticated as like Tabular Editor 3, but, it doesn't have all those bells and whistles. It's just designed just to do DAX editing. And that's kind of how I approach my tools. It's like everybody seems to want to build like this single tool that does like 50 different things, right? And I guess I think differently about that. I'm like, I'd rather have like have a tool and just have it do one thing really well, and it's specifically designed for purpose. It's you don't have any kind of bloat or anything around it. When you want to use it, you launch it and there you go. And not just it's kind of weird. Some of these tools, they have like, 5 or 6 different things they do, and they don't relate at all to one another. It's just, hey, here's some functionality. So I don't know if that's the right philosophy or not, but I tend to think complexity is evil, so I try to avoid it.
Yeah, nice. And so how were you surprised at how much you could manipulate, like within the Power BI environment, or did you always have an idea that this was becoming more open, like what particularly Power BI Desktop?
Yeah, the thing that I'm impressed by what they've allowed you to do, but I'm also disappointed in that like there is still no Power BI Desktop API. There's no automation API for like the desktop, like you have in Office, right? You always had that Office API, and it allowed you to do automation and create Word documents and all of that sort of thing, kind of on the fly, and automate pretty much anything you'd ever want to in like Word or Excel or any of that stuff. And we still don't have that for Power BI Desktop. I think if they ever make something like that available, then it, it's unlimited possibilities. And right now you're pretty much kind of constrained to the data model, the tabular analysis services data model. And I keep finding new things. So like there's 3 new tools that I was talking with Ryan Julius about. And it's all so the 3 new tools are really going to deal with something I haven't really touched on in the tabular editor yet, which is all the queries, right? So being able to like take the date table for enterprise DNA and have drop down for setting the different, pieces and parts of it, and then have that, go create that in your data model for you, along with maybe flagging all the holidays. So I can get in all the work I've been doing around like calculating Easter and calculating the equinoxes and solstices and things like that. And then another tool was like, well, if the DAX editor is a good thing, can we come up with a better version of the Power Query editor and do the same thing? So give you a nice interface, simple interface, automatic commenting, all that sort of stuff, and do that for the Power Query editor, because it's still, it's a little bit kind of like the DAX editor. It's okay, but it's not great by any stretch of the imagination. And then the last one was, well, if people like being able to templatize their DAX measures, which is what Quick Measures Pro does, then why couldn't we do the same thing for queries, right? So take that concept from Quick Measures Pro and apply it to queries, where people can create their M queries and save them as like reusable templates, and then use them across data models. So,
and all of that from your perspective is possible. So it's just manipulating the metadata within a Power BI Desktop file.
Yeah, it's well, they call it. So it's interesting learning when you delve into the depths of analysis services, tabular model. They call things differently. Like, I mean, a column
Right.
is a column, and a table is a table, and a measure is a measure. But like a query is called a partition. So
Right.
you have to learn, about, okay, it's called a query, but if you look for queries anywhere in the tabular editor API, it's not there, and that's because they're partitions.
Mm.
Things like you see in the desktop, like whole numbers. Well, it's not a whole number; it's an int 64. And a decimal is actually a double. There's
Mm-hmm.
different terminology. Like current when it says currency in the desktop, that's a decimal in the
Mm-hmm.
tabular editor model. So you have to. It is a learning curve to learn all these different things because the desktop hides a lot of that complexity and makes it nice. Different
Right.
terminology.
Right. Um, Getting back to the API, what I'm interested. What are some of the additional things like around automation that could be done with a like access to the Power BI desktop API?
Well, one of the things I was thinking about is, a lot of people have asked this around like your theming tool that you have, which is fantastic, especially since you added in the ability to import an existing theme. I mean, that's a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic feature. And then, so basically you can tweak it. Well, it'd be nice if you could actually see what the tweaks are within like actual visuals. You know what I mean? If you had something like a
Right.
desktop API where you could automate that and apply that theme and kind of automatically build some visuals and show them dynamically, then that would be super powerful, I would think. And I think a lot of people would like that. But it's kind of, you really can't do that. You almost have to come up with like, well, I'll have to use some other graphics package and show like, create a bar chart or a column chart and then sort of apply those colors. But it's not going to be the same as if it was actual real Power BI that you were, manipulating those visuals dynamically from an external tool. I think that would be super. That would be one. That's the very first one that I thought of. That like it would solve that problem.
Right. Well, do you think, like, is there the possibility to actually embed the logic in that theme editor into an external tool? So you could actually build the theme within the external toolbar rather than actually having to go to a website?
Oh yeah, I think that. And Brian and I kicked that idea around. It's like, okay, we could build that into an external tool, or do we just link out to the theme editor? Because you can do like open up Edge and open up the theme editor. And I think if we had that desktop API where we could do that automation, then I think it makes perfect sense to then port that over and make that an interactive tool that you're using. But until I don't know if it makes sense without that, because you guys have done a great job on that web-based interface. I think it's super easy to use. Could you do the same thing in a Windows form and stuff? Yeah. But then what would it, does it add?
Right. Yeah. Does the effort weigh the benefits? Nice. And so I mean, you mentioned a few cool ideas that I totally agree with of some other tools. Is there anything, what are some other ideas? Like what I guess there's just so much more that you can do than most people would ever dream of. What are some other ideas? And I'll give you a couple of things that pop up to my mind, because one of our latest things internally at Enterprise DNA has been, it's all about automation. Is trying to automate every part of development. And three things sort of stick out to me that still could help with some automation. One is having design templates for your report. So being able to import a template. So choose from a range of templates and be able to import those. And be able to maybe like click through different templates and see, okay, do I like this one? Do I like that one? There's ideas like this around the web, and people have tried to do it, but still, to me, it hasn't been executed that well. So it's sort of taking out the ambiguity around design. That's one thing that I think is big. Icons is another one. Is getting high quality icons automatically into your reports and your visuals. That's the other big one. And then the last one was something around modeling, automating modeling in the back end. Modeling is sort of like there's no set rules to modeling, but I think that there needs to be some sort of best practice guidance that you give to users. And the reason why I think this is a big thing is I just continue to work with our customers and people that we train, and even questions on the forum that we see all the time. And over 50%, maybe 75% of the time, the biggest issue is the model. It is the model which is the problem. There's just so much. I just think it's the hardest thing to learn for a novice user is really understanding how that model works. So those are my three. But I definitely am interested in one, what you think of those, and some of the other ideas that you've got.
Yeah, I don't know if I love the idea of the design templates in that, because I think a lot of people, I'm not a graphic designer. You can probably tell from my tools. They're the UI is very simple, and it's not flashy or fancy or anything like that, or I wouldn't call it particularly slick. And I'm going to improve on that stuff, incrementally over time, but I'm not a UI UX guy. And so, but I love so I would love to have a tool that would help me with design. But I don't know if we're going to be able to solve that, because I think the right way to solve that is you kind of pick your template and then it goes and builds those design elements within your Power BI desktop file, which I think is going to require it's going to require a desktop API so you can automate, the creation of elements within a report. But we'll see, because the other way that people have tried to solve it, right, is Power BI template files. Where they implement the design or whatever, and then you just base your report on that template, which works. It's okay. It's not a great solution. It's not a terrible solution. The icon sets, I've heard that come up before, and I've been kicking around exactly how that could be done. There's some great icon, free icon that are out there. So it'd just be a matter of how do you implement that into the Power BI stuff, and then the modeling is another good idea, and that one actually would be doable, I think, because you can create partitions or queries, right? And you're right. I mean, a lot of the times I see somebody's trying to create some crazy complex DAX measure, and it's like, dude, just unpivot your columns, and then it's a simple sum.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's like I was working with a customer, and they were like they had like 40 tables in their model, and then they were writing the most complex DAX formulas, like one after the other. And then I had they were trying to explain to me, oh, we need to solve this, and like intuitively to me, I was like, oh my god, that's really simple. And then they showed me their model, and I was like, oh my god, there's just no way there's no way I could even look at this and try and figure that out. Like you need to totally switch what is happening in your model. But this is just not a one-off. Like this is happening time and time and time again. This is what's holding back, on top of the just general design of Power BI. This is what is holding back deployments within organizations all across the world. This is one of the biggest pain points of a Power BI deployment is the mess in the models, the mess in the data architecture. And to me, that is sort of like I'm surprised that Microsoft is not offering solutions to solve it, but that's also an opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I'll tell you a good story in terms of one of the people that I saw that solved this problem the best was an individual named Jason Ramsey. And he used to come to my user groups quite often, especially back in the day. But what he did was he built a data model for Procore, so it's used in construction and all of that. So he built it around the Procore product, and he built out, a data model for it. And then that was able to, kind of stock reports. And then he was able to then just wire that up to, anybody's Procore system and generate these reports for these, construction guys that, they really value a lot of that data and safety information and things like that. But so he Procore actually ended up buying his business. But I think maybe it's a matter of, because it's interesting because there's so many people that have we have Dynamics ERP, or we have Salesforce, or we have JD Edwards, or these different systems. You almost have to build those models, or maybe, I don't know, you almost have to build it around a product or like common data models and common data sets. But or do you build, you take a standard financial reporting data model, and then you just, then it's transformation logic to get it from one system to a different, another system, and that, but you always want to get it in that templatized data model. I don't know. I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of how to solve it, but I don't know exactly how to do it yet.
Yeah, there's a website out there that has always fascinated me. It's not a very well trafficked website, but it's called databaseanswers.org. And basically it has a catalog of over 1,000 data models and how you would set them up in a best practice way. It's not something that you need to exactly follow, but at least it gives you the template to actually target as part of your model. And I've always thought that there needs to be a Power BI version of this particular source, and it needs to be, you need to have 1,000 templates working through every single potential model that you could deal with, whether you're in like hospitality or construction or finance, right? And you kind of lay out, okay, this is what the best practice model should look like, but then you actually make it look like it's the Power BI model. So people are looking at it like, okay, this is what I should try and aim for in this particular scenario. That's kind of been my sort of vision on that. I don't know if that's an external tool, to be honest. Like, it's probably something for the analyst hub, maybe, or a standalone tool by itself. But databaseanswers.org is this like incredible catalog of things that has been done by a SQL developer, I think.
I'm going to have to check that out, because there are very specific rules and best practices around things like slowly changing dimensions, right? And how to handle that with a data model, I'm definitely going to check that out. That's a good tip.
Like, it would be really cool. Like, if you could, I mean, I honestly don't know if this is an external tool. It probably is just like some sort of like website build. And I think that we're in a good place to do this as enterprise DNA. I do believe that. Is that you could choose which industry you're in, which business function you're in, and then it would throw up an example model for you and say, okay, these are the lookup tables, these are the fact tables, and shows you what it should look like. And then if you want to check out, okay, what if I want to do some forecasting? It could show, okay, well, here's what a forecasting model should look like, and you just give a bit more clarity around what your model should look like within the Power BI experience. And then you could also take a step back, and you can kind of say, okay, well, how can you build more scalable architecture around all of your data? Because you got to include data sets and data flows now, and showcase how they could be built into your model as well. So there's a few variations there, but if you could build a nice setup within a web-based experience that someone could just sort of click through and see what they want, I think that would be pretty killer. That would be really, really helpful to pretty much every Power BI developer in the entire world.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, an external tool could fill that gap, because again, you can create those base queries, right? So you could pick a model, and then it could go out and create base queries for your fact tables, your lookup dimensions, lookup tables. It could create that base, the base set of queries and tables that you'd want to have, and maybe even generate links, the relationships between them. So at least you have a starting point. And then you can go in and modify and link it to your own data sources and things like that. But it absolutely, that could be done. The other place that I think external tools, that there's a place for external tools, or maybe if they're just web-based tools, but the other big API that we have out there is the Power BI Service API. And using and building out administrative tools, or even like tools for, like, right now you can create a deployment pipeline. You create a workspace and you tie it to the deployment pipeline. You create the next workspace. Well, why not just have a button? You say create pipeline, and it goes out and creates all those 3 workspaces in the pipeline automatically for you. Again, back to your automation comment. So, I mean, I think there's a ton of potential around the Power BI Service API and building external tools or some kind of tooling around it. And I don't think there's a ton out there.
Yeah,
but again, I was just
automation.
I don't know if it has as big of a market, because probably that would play more for like Power BI administrators, which, there's probably one Power BI administrator for every, 100 analysts that are out there.
Yeah, look, I agree with that. But the more that I have dealt with customers and and challenges with internal deployments with organizations is that much more. There actually needs to be much more focus at that administrative level. Like, I think, and this is a sort of a personal view that's evolved over time, is that so much effort is put into learning DAX and and creating visualizations, learning a bit of Power Query. But if you do that in isolation within an organization and everyone's off doing their own thing, you have suboptimal deployments of Power BI. Like that's just the reality, right? Like unless on the flip side, if you are more build a lot more sort of strategy around these architectural type things in your deployment, the models that you build, the report templates that you use. Like if there is just a lot more planning and strategizing around how to do this, it makes everyone's life easier, and it also just overall makes the deployment just like 5 times better. That is the conclusion that I've come to sort of multiple times over.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's like we're reliving the lessons learned from SharePoint all over again, right? I mean, SharePoint was very much the same way. The departments went off and did their own thing, and it was just a mishmash of stuff. And there was, then Microsoft got on, bent on all the governance. Yeah, we need governance for SharePoint, and exactly all the stuff that you talked about. We need these controls around it. And then there was a huge governance movement within SharePoint. It solved a lot of problems. And I think, Power BI to a certain extent is somewhat similar. Like, and part of it's because of how Microsoft, they went after the end users first, right? They didn't even have like a real enterprise solution at first until they came out with Premium, a few years later. But they really promoted, it to the citizen data scientist, citizen business analyst to just go out there and build stuff. And so I think there's I've walked into a lot of Power BI deployments they remind me of early SharePoint deployments. It's just a mishmash of everyone doing their own thing.
Yeah, right. And I'm interested, like, how have you advised to correct it? So what have been the key things that you've talked to those customers about to improve what they've started?
Yeah, I mean, so as a consultant, you always have to be careful about calling somebody's baby ugly, right? Different environments, you take different tacks in terms of just how amenable the people are that you're working with to, like, hey, I was just working with a customer today, and they were showing me, that, hey, this is the stuff I built, and they had this big long SQL query just pasted right into as the first step in their DAX query or their Power Query. I'm like, and then they had some other transformations over there, and so you're kind of tiptoeing around and like, okay, so that's one way of doing it, but like right click and see how you're not seeing the native query, you're breaking query folding, you'd probably get better performance, so it's different. It's different with every customer. You just, there's no getting around the politics when you're a consultant.
Yeah, right. And so what with your consulting work, what does most of the engagements look like? Are they sort of one-off, or are they more sort of long-term retainer type structures?
Yeah, so for me, actually, so we have Fusion Alliance has a whole strategic data management practice. So really a lot of, that kind of work and that goes on in that practice. I get called in a lot of times for like my Power BI expertise. So, and a lot of my engagements are exactly what you're talking about around the governance. It's like, hey, we know, and it's always nice when the customers are coming to you like, hey, we know our baby's ugly, and we want you to come in and take a look at how ugly it is and tell us how to fix it, right? And so those engagements are going in and kind of, assessing what's there, and then saying, okay, you need to do, and creating a roadmap of, here's current state, here's what you want as future state, and here's your roadmap on how to get there. I get involved in a lot of those kind of engagements within Fusion Alliance.
Mm-hmm. And what are the biggest, like, as a whole, what are the biggest recommendations you give around improving what they've got right now to getting it to a really optimal state?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it involves, you'll go into environments and they've got every tenant setting turned on for everyone, right? And you're like, ooh, that's not best practice, right? You should turn, you should exclude everything you can. And if you are going to enable something, just enable it for one security group and then control that, because you'll have, individuals listed, in tenant settings, it's allowed for this person, that person. It's like, you shouldn't be doing that, so there's those kind of recommendations. And then a lot of it ends up being around security and workspaces. And you go into, and they'll just have, they'll have individuals listed as permissions within a workspace, right? And it's like, no, that shouldn't be doing that. Or a lot of times I've seen people where they use the viewer role. I wish Microsoft would never come out with the viewer role for workspaces, because people use it, and they just, hey, they got access to everything. It's just the easy button kind of way to give them access. Well, they really shouldn't have access to everything in that workspace. They're only working with these 2 reports, So I think there's, and people not understanding that, hey, when you give anybody a role within a workspace above a viewer role, it totally negates row level security, right? I mean, so it's all, and most of this governance stuff, a lot of it revolves around, organization of content, who's allowed to do what in what workspaces, and security is a huge aspect of that.
Right. Anything around the data architecture? Like, do you sort of look into a particular workspace, see if there's tons of overlap in terms of data into various different Power BI reports, and then do you work out, okay, well, this could be a Power BI data set, this could be a data flow? Like, is that a big part of it as well?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of that goes on, and part of that is Microsoft didn't have great solutions for that until, like, they came out with the direct query for Power BI data sets. That solved a huge issue that I saw on multiple different customers, especially larger enterprises that wanted to be able to reuse models, but just needed additional, to be able to tack on additional things. Or we have this great data set over here and this great data set over here, but we can't merge the 2 because we only can connect to one on via direct query at a time, that kind of stuff, or via live at a time. So that solved a lot of that. But yeah, you see that all the time because, back, in the early days of development, or if you're kind of not paying attention, don't have good governance controls in place, okay, we developed this data set over here. Well, I'll just copy my queries from over here and create a brand new report and then copy those queries. Now you've got the data duplicated in 16 different places, right? Versus having the mindset of, hey, let's build this once and reuse it on multiple reports and connect live back to a master golden data set. So I'm always, usually part of the recommendation coming out of that is, hey, you've got data sets scattered all over the place. And what you want to get to is, I call it the golden data set. You want to build one data set that has everything that at least for a particular business function like sales or marketing or something like that. And this speaks really well to like mastering Power BI. It's the same, it has the same mindset. It goes down and shows people, here's the best practices on how to do that, and exactly what you're talking about in terms of have that governance and that data modeling mindset where, ideal case, you have one Power BI data set that services everything.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like a lot of this has been brought about because the tools and the techniques to solve it weren't there before, right? Like, I've only been around for sort of 2 years, and everyone's been using Power BI for 4 to 5 years, and so everyone just dealt with what they had at the time. What do you see as the best strategy? I'm really interested in your take here. The best strategy for getting everyone to a wide variety of people to build reports themselves. Do you feel like everyone should be building reports within the Power BI desktop experience, or you should have your power users building up the data sets within Power BI desktop using that environment, but then having the ability for even everyday consumers or sometimes analysts to be able to create it within the Power BI online experience?
That's a great question. I definitely believe so. I think of it in terms of corporate BI, self-service visualization, and then self-service BI is the way I kind of group them. So corporate BI is basically all reporting and all data modeling is owned by corporate IT. And then in self-service visualization, it's the data models are owned by corporate IT, and then the visualizations are built by the business. And then the last one is obviously the business owns the data models and the visualizations. I'm a big believer in the first two, and especially corporate BI. It just be probably because I have that infrastructure, that old school IT mentality. But I definitely believe that the data models should definitely be owned by corporate IT, by professional data modelers, which most business analysts are not. That being said, there's different philosophies and different companies have different needs, right? But I am a big believer that, because you're right. I mean, the data modeling is really the hard part. Once you get the data model in place, and have it clean, it's really building visualizations is not overly difficult. It's click, next, finish, but it really takes, I think, somebody that knows what they're doing in a large part to build those professional kind of data models. I don't know if I answered your question or not, though.
Yeah, no, look, I think you make some really good points, right? Because a data model these days, and this is how I see it now, a data model is not in isolation. A data model itself is not as important as the data models across our workspace. So you need, like, in my view, you need to plan out the data models within a workspace that roll up to each separate report. Because there's data, like if you think about what a workspace is, there's probably a vast majority of tables which are common across like a lot of the reports that you might have in a workspace. So it's thinking about how an individual data model works in context with the rest of your workspace, which I think is what needs to be somehow planned out and governed from a few key people. And then if you do that right, then I think it opens up more opportunities for more people to actually create reports, because everything's sort of optimized in the back end. And then you can use Power BI Desktop, but you can also, if you have the right templates and the right themes, you can actually quickly throw up a report in the online service, which can be easier for the everyday user who might not want to get too involved in creating measures and creating new relationships or those sort of things. The reason I only recently came to that conclusion myself, because I was always any visualization, do it in Power BI Desktop, but I actually worked with a customer, and I was so impressed by how they had actually planned out this one workspace, and it sort of like had a light bulb go on for me, because I thought, wow, like anyone could create a visualization here now. Like they had a template. It was kind of like it had a theme. It wasn't the best design template or anything, but basically like anyone in the Power BI online service within that particular workspace could actually design a good report, roll it up to an app, and it was just very, very efficient, very, very scalable. Removed a ton of confusion, complexity, and ambiguity around how you would actually go about designing any reports within a workspace.
Yeah, I think if you get the data model and have the golden data set or golden data model or multiple golden data sets, then it really doesn't matter to me if you develop the reports in the service or in desktop. Either way, you're still connecting to that golden data set and creating, doing that. Now, that said, self-service visualization, in my opinion, this, it throws up some concerns around some of the recommendations that are out there, some of the best practices that are out there. Like, for example, the one that I keep coming back to, and I'm gonna create a video on this because I have like the measure totals, the final word is measure totals, right? Everyone says don't use calculated columns, use measures. Okay, but in self-service visualization, you almost have, if you're using table or matrix visualizations, you almost have to design the measure for the visualization, right? So if I'm slicing and dicing by department and I have 12 departments, I have to, versus I'm slicing and dicing by product color or by product subcategory, and you have any kind of complex measure calculation, you're almost guaranteed to have a measures total problem, right? So now in self-service visualization, how do you solve that, right? Do you have to create a measure for like every possible scenario, versus if you use a calculated column, the total is always right. So, I mean, I've gone back, and that's something I've gone back and forth in my career is, hey, you should always use, measures, that's what people would always tell me. But I found in self-service visualization, customers that want to use that model, that columns work phenomenally better. As long as you don't run into the issues that having calculated columns cause, you have the data set model grows and et cetera, refresh times and things like that. But if you don't, those are the reasons not to use calculated columns, right? But if those aren't concerns, then calculated columns are far superior to measures when you're dealing with things like measure totals in table and matrix visualizations.
That's a real
controversial.
I don't know if I personally 100% agree with that one, but I get your point. I get your point, but there's just I see there's so many more downsides with calculated columns. Like,
I agree with you. There's definitely, but I mean, it's gotten to the point where I've talked in the customers. There's a medical provider here in Columbus, Ohio, that what they actually had they had a different measure table for what they called complex measures. And basically is if you're going to use these measures in your own visuals, call IT. That's what it was.
Right.
Because they recognized the problems.
Interesting. Look, I totally agree that that's actually a problem. I totally agree. I'm just most of the times when I see calculated columns, just all of the issues you mentioned, like they become so prevalent, like they just destroy the rest of the experience. So it's a massive trade-off there. And most people don't work with small data sets from what I've seen. I mean, most people are. One of the largest errors I see that a lot of novice users or newbies use is they actually try and place everything into one model. And so every decision you make around calculated columns and measures and relationships, it just has this like compounding effect. And so, I just don't see it regularly enough where a model is so simple that a calculated column, it's rare. It's rare that I see that. So that would be my only concern there. Anyway, I want to just switch to your books. I want to learn a little bit more about your books and enable you to do a bit of a plug for your books, because I know we're sort of winding down the hour here for our session. So tell us a little bit more about your current book that you're working on and releasing, and then maybe also just a little bit about your older ones and what's in them and what everyone can learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, mastering Power BI, it really fits in well with what you're talking about in terms of it's a book. It was originally written by Brett Powell, wrote the first edition. So I'm updating it to the second edition. And it really speaks to Power BI and how you implement it in any enterprise and provide the right governance and the best practices around that, right? It very much is focused on that topic versus like a self-service BI or something like that. So it's really written for the enterprise and how you implement Power BI, quote unquote, correctly, with all the right governance controls. And, it talks about all of that sort of stuff. And it has a lot of, it's got paginated reports. It's got a whole chapter on paginated reports, whole chapter on, data gateways and how to plan data gateways and, what your strategy should be and where you're going to do your data gateway placements. And it's really much more of it's almost, it's not like a cookbook where it's like giving you specific instructions on how to do something. It's telling you why you should be doing things the way you should be doing them, not necessarily how. Although it's got some how in it as well, obviously. But that's the Mastering Power BI. It's going to be a great book. It covers so much ground. I think it's going to be one of those like 1,000-page monster books because the original was like, already was a big, and we've added a ton of content into it and really updated. So it's and Brett's been great to work with. This is the second book I've worked with because the one I wrote before this, well, no, it was 2 ago. But the other one I wrote with Brett was Power BI Cookbook, which is more of how, right? Here's recipes. Like if you want to build a paginated report, here's exactly how you step by step. Here's how you build a paginated report. Or if you want to implement Power BI deployment pipelines, step by step, here's how to do it. So it's almost like you can think of Mastering Power BI and Power BI Cookbook as almost kind of companions. This is more of the why, and this is more of the how. And then the other books I wrote are completely different from those. Though my favorite has always been DAX Cookbook because it basically is recipes for DAX formulas, right? And it takes it not from a theoretical perspective, but it says, okay, let's take a look at the manufacturing industry. What are some common KPIs in the manufacturing industry? and then presents sample data models and then the actual DAX calculations on how to calculate things like mean time before failure and these very common metrics in HR and in marketing and all these different things, net promoter score, all that sort of stuff. And then the other book, the first book I ever wrote, and I just came out with the second edition of it in February, was Learn Power BI. And it's written from a completely different perspective. It's written from the perspective of a business analyst trying to learn Power BI. And so it takes them, basically it follows Pam is the business analyst, and I actually work with the real life Pam, by the way.
Right.
It's an actual person. Right. And they build this one report. And so the entire book is all about building just, one report, essentially doing one thing, but it takes that user for all the way from planning the Power BI project to data ingest, to the DAX calculations, to building the themes and the template report pages and all, it takes them, and then publishing it to the service and distributing it. So that's that one. Those are the books I've written.
Yeah, that's cool. I don't know, honestly, I don't know how you have time for anything else, but that's pretty amazing to be able to say that you've authored five books, is it?
Yeah, this will be the Mastering Power BI, but technically the fifth. I don't know how people rank books as far as second editions, if those count as like a full book or as like a half book. I don't know, but I just count them as a book. It takes me about the same amount of time either way.
Yeah, I mean, you have to go and update all the images and all that. I mean, it's basically the same time investment, isn't it?
Oh, it's crazy. Like, I mean, especially the step-by-step books like Learn Power BI. It's I shudder every time Microsoft comes out with a major new update to the UI. It's like, oh, that's going to have to be changed in the next edition. And that was one of my favorite things I was able to do with the second edition of Learn Power BI is that was supposed to be published like 3 months earlier. And we delayed it because Microsoft was coming out with the new format pane. So then the second edition of my book actually includes the instructions for the new format pane. And I was literally like fixing it on the day it was released.
Well, you think that's annoying. Think about having to update 40 different course modules and thousands of hours of videos for the new designs. It's absolutely frustrating.
I didn't even think about that, but yeah, that's even worse.
Oh my God. I mean, we've already redone every course at least once, except for the more recent releases. But yeah, I mean, every time there's a change, you're like, oh my God, we're gonna have to redo the 6-hour course.
I don't think it's ever going to end with Power BI.
Yeah, I know.
It's always going to be that way.
Yeah. Last question for you. What do you like as being part of the MVP community the most?
Well, I would have said the in-person global summits, but we haven't had one of those in like 2 years. But no, we had a really fun, and I can't talk about it. That's the worst part about being an MVP is that you have some of these great interactions with other MVPs in the product groups, and you can't talk about it with anybody because it's all NDA. But we had a really lively, fun discussion with the product group on something that they're doing that I can't talk about. But it was, those are the fun conversations when you actually get to give real feedback back to the product group. And MVPs are generally not shy about expressing their opinions. And by and large, and this was we just had one of these conversations with the product group about some things that they're doing in the product, and there was a lot of feedback. Let me put it, just put it there. But that's where and everybody's respectful, but it's like but everybody's got their own opinion about whether this is a good idea, bad idea, and those are the things that I have a lot of fun participating in because it's really you'll get Marco Russo on there or Alberto Ferrari, and they have very strong opinions about what they think, and it's just fun to listen to those guys and get their perspective. And everybody's got, people bring perspectives that it's like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So because everybody's got different customers and everybody's got different needs. Like your example is, you deal with large enterprises and very complex data models and that. But I don't know what the percentages are, but I would bet you the single table data model probably is the largest percentage of Power BI data models that's out there, but you don't deal with that stuff. But I would tend to bet you that if you did the 80-20 rule or something like that, I would bet you that the single table data model or very simple data models probably are the majority.
No, I haven't really ever thought that, because I've always thought that you at least need a date table. So there's usually always always two. But no, that's a good point. And what was I going to say? What are the, like? Are you excited? I know you can't talk about it, but are you excited in the sort of medium term direction that Power BI is going in? Do you think is there some really good and exciting things on the horizon?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's exciting to me is that it doesn't seem like Microsoft has a tendency, like sometimes they have a tendency, like any vendor, any software vendor, if they get ahead in the market, right, they have a tendency to kind of rest on their laurels and, basically, okay, we're the market leader and, blah, 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 and we don't really need to, it doesn't seem to me the Power BI team is thinking that way, or Microsoft these days either, right? Whether or not I think they're continually approaching it from the perspective that they're behind, that they're the startup, or from a perspective of they know that some startup can come out of nowhere and just disrupt the entire market, right? And come out with something brand new. And, I think because it's happened so many times, especially, you look at, just look at, Uber and these other companies that have just come in and just totally blown up, an existing market that everybody thought was stable and, nothing was going on. And the market leaders were, they're like, we don't need to make this easier for our users or do anything to improve the product. I just don't think that's the most exciting thing for me. I think is that I don't get that sense at all from Microsoft and the Power BI team or anything like that. Now that said, the disappointing part about it is I know I'm going to have to update my books and videos and everything like that because things are going to change, right? So
yeah, right. And where do you think we are in the Power BI wave? Like, do you feel like there's just so much more room to grow in terms of adoption out there globally for businesses in Power BI, or do you think that we're getting closer to maturity of acceptance of Power BI as a tool?
I say, and this may be, you may disagree with me on this, but I think there's a huge untapped market for Power BI. I mean, if you really look at Power BI, it's a complex tool. Like how many people open up Power BI and are like, and I know of a few people personally, they've opened up Power BI and they're like, nope, I don't have any idea what to do, close, right? How many of those people are out there that, and you mentioned data modeling is tough, right? If you start getting any kind of, real data modeling, DAX calculations are tough. There's a learning curve. How many people are out there that aren't willing to, go up that curve, right? I bet it's huge number. I don't know what that number is, but I guarantee it's more than the entire Power BI user base today, probably by double, would be my guess. So what if I think Power BI, what can be done with Power BI Desktop to make it easier to use, whether that's Power BI Desktop itself or Power BI itself, Microsoft, or it's through external tools. I think there's a huge upside potential to tap into those people that they don't want that huge learning curve. Like they want something more level. And if you really look at it, it's hard from and I think about this stuff because I've been working with it for so long. Things are just like second nature to me. A lot of this, and I've had 5 years to absorb what Power BI is now. But think about somebody that's just now getting into Power BI, right? And all the different licensing options, right? That we never had. They were incremental one at a time, and these features were incremental, a few at a time. But now you're coming into the ground floor, and it's just all hitting you at once. That's got to be daunting, I think.
Yeah. Oh, look, I couldn't agree with you more. I actually think we're still just at the beginning of where Power BI could be in the next 10 years. Like there's 300 million Excel users or something like that. I would say there's probably less than 5 million Power BI users, probably even less than that. And everyone who uses Excel should be using Power BI. Like that's what I truly believe. I think you need to democratize Power BI development even more. But I think that's where a lot of tooling even some of the stuff that we're working on with the external toolbar and the analyst hub, just making it just so super simple to actually develop reports, maybe even bypassing the modeling, bypassing measure creation, just getting people very quickly being able to throw up really, really good visualizations. Like I think even that, is got so much more room to grow, so much more. Because if you think about the Power BI, just didn't have a lot of the bells and whistles it has even now to make it simpler, like 2 years ago. And so it's still this evolving product that it can bring more and more users into its universe. And I think it's going to become, with the help of external partners and builders in the community. I think there's just so much scope. You really want your manager. You want your manager to be able to be like, oh, okay, I want to know this insight. I don't see it. I want to either type it in as a query, or I want to be able to go in and create it myself. Like that's where I think you want to be able to get to. And I have no doubt that it can be done. I mean, I think we agree on that.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that distinction between Excel users and Power BI users, that's a good one, Sam. What if Power BI desktop was as easy to use as Excel? I mean, there's just something intuitive. Maybe it's because it's been around for so long, but there's just something intuitive about, thinking in terms of cells and rows, and there's an address for every cell. When you get into DAX, it's like you can't think that way. It doesn't work that way. You got to think about filtering down to a certain row and then selecting a column in that. But what if you could make it as easy to do, as an intuitive as Excel? I mean, that would, think of how many more users that you would have.
I believe you can make it more intuitive than Excel. You just have to automate a lot of the sort of architecting and behind the scenes in a workspace, and then creation of things like measures and the model, and then having a sort of visualization template. Then all it really takes is someone to be able to place certain visualizations into certain places in a report page, and pull down from certain elements. Maybe say they want a certain navigation experience. Okay, well, click here, they can drag that in. Say they want a certain icon that goes to a certain page or something. I don't know. To me, the way that Power BI is structured is there's more automation possibilities than even Excel, because there's more structure, I think, around what you could do. Excel is very ad hoc because you can click into any cell and you can actually, you can do whatever you want, which is good, which is great, but it doesn't lend itself to a lot of automation. But within Power BI, I think you have these sort of pillars that build one on top of the other, and if you can really drill down into one of those pillars, like modeling or querying or measures, we've already and those sort of things. So to me, there's just optimizations on top of what's already out there that can get us closer to that North Star.
Yeah, I think that's where things are headed, but we'll see.
Yeah. Okay, Greg, why don't we wrap up? Because we've gone, I think we've gone just over an hour. So, hey, really thanks, really big thanks for joining me today, and really enjoyed our discussion. So many exciting things going on with Power BI, and it's awesome to have you associated with Enterprise DNA, helping us move the needle on some of these great initiatives. So great to have you on, and great to have you as part of the team at Enterprise DNA.
Yeah, happy to be here. It's been a great experience, and I've loved everything I've been doing for you guys, and working with Brian and all that, and you, and so and the team. I mean, they come up with just the graphics team come up with such great icons and graphics and things for these tools. I just always super impressed with them, and it does actually gives stuff I'm doing like a professional look. So,
it's awesome. Yeah, no, look, that's what one of the things we're big on. So yeah, we're trying to build this engine and behind the scenes that can really help out with those things. So
yeah, it's been great working with the team. Even the debuggers who would find all the bugs in my code, that I go fix. It's great, because I can't test all these different scenarios that these guys come up with. So it's been awesome working with the whole team.
Good stuff. Okay, well let's wrap up. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks everyone for tuning into the Analytic Mind podcast. Don't forget to subscribe in all your favorite listening locations, and watch out for more content in the coming weeks. Okay, thanks all.